The panel that we're talking about now is voter rights suppression, voter-related issues. We have a very illustrious panel here today. If I may introduce them, Alyssa Mariani has been with the ACLU many years, involved in a number of different aspects of ACLU programs. We've heard her once before at one of our meetings, and she's a wealth of knowledge and information. Thank you very much for coming. Dan Glicklick is on our Board of Elections, as is Karen Carroll. They are appointed, they are the Democratic members of the Board of Elections. There are 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, and they have great insight. Rob Wilson is from Somerville, an attorney from Somerville, and he's been involved in training that I've gone through to be a challenger. So he knows what's involved in being a good challenger, how to do it right, protects our voting interests, voting rights. Nothing can be more important than to make sure that our elections are fair, equitable, and that we all have the right to vote. So with that, thank you very much. Here you
go. Karen is going to read the mission statement of the Election Commission before we start. And it's a pretty good background, and it's very accurate of why we exist. And then I'm going to go into a little bit more detail and begin the conversation about the importance of voting. And then I know we're going to talk about election rights, so that would be a nice segue.
About suppression.
Suppression, yes.
Suppression.
Karen?
Okay, I'm the relative newcomer here because I've literally been on the election board for less than a month. So, that's why I'm kind of reading everything here. The mission statement for the Somerset County Board of Elections is that the Somerset County Board of Elections endeavors to ensure the integrity and accuracy of every election by administering fair and appropriate voting procedures which are in full compliance with federal and state election laws and regulations. The board is strongly committed to timely registering every eligible voter as well as maintaining an accurate voter registration database for Somerset County. It is also a major priority of the board to ensure that elections are held in sites that accommodate all voters, including those with mobility impairments. The board also ensures that all voting machines are properly secured, equipped, maintained, and fully operational on election day. So that's about as simple as it gets. We do take care of lots of things. There are audio devices that are in some of the machines. There's a statewide voter registration system that's in place. There's now the no excuses mail-in ballots, so nobody really has an excuse for not voting because they can use the mail-in ballot. Used to be in the old days where you had to be sick, you had to be out of town, you had to have some reason where you couldn't vote. And now we have a 21-day registration deadline. It used to be 30 days. Which means that the primary registration deadline is May 14th and October 15th for the deadline. So let me just pass this on to Dan.
Thank you. When I first got on the election board about a year ago, I was told by a couple of the commissioners that this board is nonpartisan. We just follow the rules. And I corrected them. I said, no, it's not. It's bipartisan. The law says there have to be. Actually, it doesn't say 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. That's what a lot of people think. What it says is the party that got the most votes in the previous general election as a representative on the election board. The party that gets the second most votes also has equal representation. It just so happens that in most cases it's the Republicans and Democrats, so people tend to think that that's the way it has to be. Our meetings, Board of Election meetings, are all open to the public. And we read a public statement at the beginning of each meeting. They're obviously not well attended. They are if there's some controversy. Most of the controversies have been over Board of Education elections, however. And so far, the votes have been almost all 4 commissioners have agreed, and politics has not played a role in the Board of Education elections so far. Not only that, when you're looking at ballots, you don't really know how the person voted. What we're looking for really is to see if the signatures are genuine and if they will count without opening the envelopes to see how the person voted. So, the Board of Elections approves all the polling places. The clerks of the township really are the key, though, to polling places. The clerks of the township work very carefully with our board to make sure that there are enough polling places and to make sure that they are accessible to people. Voting machines are checked by the assistant administrator, and here in Somerset County, that's Tom Fagan. All the machines are checked, all the computers are checked, the electronic components are checked, and the electronic backup components are checked. There are trial runs, and all of these with data are presented to the commission for approval before the machines can be used. We contract service providers. We just had to hire a new company to pick up our voting machines, distribute them, and return them. There is a new state law that tracks all of the voting machines. I think that's very important. The machines are tracked from the minute they're picked up at the warehouse from a truck to wherever they're delivered. There's a GPS system. They're tracked inside the polling places. They're tracked when they're picked up and returned to the warehouse. The commission does readjustment of boundaries. I don't know if it's happened in Hillsborough or not, but I believe it has. I think there was a change of voting districts in Hillsborough. What the state law says is that if over 750 people vote in one district in two consecutive general elections, that district is probably too big. And some voters will be a voting district or two or whatever is necessary, will be moved to a contiguous voting district. On the other hand, if there are fewer than 250 voters in two consecutive general elections, then that voting district is abandoned, and those people are put into contiguous districts or enlarged, that are enlarged, and providing they don't go over 750. Because of the every 10 years the census, that also forces changes. In Somerset County, one of the basic changes is wards. In Somerset County, we basically don't have wards. Only Franklin Township has wards. And the election commissioners then become the ward commissioners. And in this case, we worked with Franklin Township. All of the meetings were televised. Everything was in the open. We held the meetings in Franklin Township so that it was accessible to all of the people. I will tell you that I did meet with Republican and Democratic leaders before the meetings to get their input. And I did that in Franklin Township. So when we got together, there was a general agreement. That's a case where it is important to have, in our case, Democrats and Republicans. Because when you start to talk about redistricting, and you talk about rewarding, there is a possibility of politics taking place and people trying to make sure that their people are elected. One other rule as far as the wards are concerned is that where you have wards, you have council people who represent each ward. And by state law, you're not allowed to move the boundaries of a ward to exclude a council person who is a ward person, which is a good thing.
As opposed to congressional districts.
As opposed to congressional districts where you could put pretty much wherever you want. Districts can be readjusted because of inconveniences. Sometimes there could be a fire, there could be I saw one last year, I went to one where it was not accessible. You had to walk through a stone driveway and parking lot, and anybody who was handicapped would have a very difficult time trying to get into that polling place. I recall years ago when I lived in Jersey City, the mayor's son-in-law, I believe, was a teacher. And the mayor wanted the school board budget to pass. And what he did, you can't do this anymore, but I thought it was interesting when I lived there. What he did is in districts that were heavily populated by seniors, he put the voting booths on the 3rd and 4th floor of buildings that didn't have elevators. So that kind of thing has been taken, and that was a Democrat, by the way. But those are the kind of things that we've done away with through the years. That's about it. We're also the board of canvassers, which means that we certify the elections when they're finished. The other thing I briefly wanted to say, to lead into the next topic, is why it's so important for us to vote, and not just for you to vote, but for you to get other people out to vote. As Democrats, and now I'm not speaking just as an election commissioner, I'm speaking as a Democrat. Democrats have traditionally supported the right to vote for everybody, supported people who were poor, supported minorities, supported the middle class, and the wealthy. In order for Barack Obama to be able to govern effectively, he needs the support of Congress. I know in my town, everybody, well, let's get out and vote for Barack Obama. Well, the president, no matter who he is, can't do very much, well, he can do a lot of things, but without the support of Congress. We see what's happening with bills that have to do with the economy, trying to get through the House of Representatives. It just takes away a lot of the powers of the president. So it's important to get people out to vote. The other reason that a lot of people don't think about is the Supreme Court. We see what's happened in recent cases in the Supreme Court. And we have Supreme Court justices, 4 of them in their 70s. Without the support of the Senate, it'll be very hard for the president to choose the people he wants, and of course impossible if he doesn't get elected. I think that the Supreme Court is absolutely vital, and I'm actually shocked sometimes in the decisions that they render. So that's another very important reason to vote. And finally, if you look at the new voting laws, voting registration laws, having to prove who you are when you go to vote. We find that in states like Wisconsin, Michigan, and many other states, they're now approving new voting laws that would in effect take away voting rights from minorities and poor people, generally people who would vote Democrat. And I think that's, to me, that's vital, and I don't know how they get away with it, but they do. And there are bills pending in the New Jersey legislature that would do very similar things. So it's important to vote, not just for the president, because a lot of people will just vote the president and they'll go home. It's important to go all the way down the list and vote for everything, especially everybody, especially your state legislators. So with that,
I'd like to talk about voter suppression in America. It's really nationwide. And if you think there's been a war on women and a war on education, there's also a war on voting, a real war on voting. Everybody knows that we have a Constitution. Most people know that we have a 15th Amendment and several other amendments that are supposed to ensure that everybody, whether they're a woman, whether they're old, whether they cannot pay some kind of tax, and whether they're a slave, that the 15th Amendment took care of obviously of the question of color or previous condition of servitude. And we think all that's finished, it's taken care of, but it's not. It's all under attack in a very sinister way. And I'm not normally paranoid, but it's really very paranoid. I mean, it's really very, very sinister. The major ways in which voter suppression across the country has been affected, always under the pretext of preventing voter fraud and safeguarding election integrity. What they have done, the major things they have done, is to mandate that a photo ID be presented in order to vote. Over 30 states have looked at this possibility, and many have passed it into law. photo ID is one. There are more states that also want documentary proof of citizenship. Other ways that voting has been suppressed is to shorten early voting times, so that leeway that people had is no longer available to them. 2 states have worked very hard, and more are working on it, to suppress voter registration, to make it harder for voter registration groups to do their work. All of this when there is no indication that voter fraud is a serious problem in this country. If it's not a problem, then why do you need 30 states and more passing laws to assure that there's no fraud? There simply is no support for doing this. This is a map which the ACLU prepared to show voter suppression measures passed since 2011. You can't see the colors very well, but it's a good chunk of the country, and since this map was made, Arizona and Nevada have become equally problematic. The ACLU is involved in fighting these discriminatory practices. They started really earlier, but one major effort on voter registration laws was made in Indiana. The ACLU took it all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court knocked it down at that time. At the moment, there are very active cases on voter suppression in Wisconsin, in South Carolina, in Arizona. If you want, more information, there's a tremendous amount of information on ACLU websites. And another very active organization that's working on voter suppression is the Brennan Center for Justice, New York University School of Law. They have excellent information, and they're working together with the ACLU and the NAACP in trying to overcome the laws that have already been passed. In New Jersey, I have found it very difficult to get information, actually. And if anyone can help me with what legislation is presently, what legislation of this type is, presently under consideration in New Jersey, I'd really like to know that. I consulted a website when I typed in New Jersey voter suppression and came up with what looked like a very active organization called Blue Jersey. My server would not present their listed information to me. They are talking, I gather, about the possibility that New Jersey is being influenced by ALEC, which is busy working on voting rights as well. They seem to have chosen just all the right elements of American life to throw their huge amounts of money into. What exactly they're doing in New Jersey, who they've gotten to propose legislation, if you know that,
I'll give you a name.
you can share, okay?
Yes.
Maybe you can share that with me, but we all had better be watching very carefully. If it's happening in all these states, then there's no reason why, that I know, that there shouldn't be an effort in New Jersey to pass similar constraints on voting. It's scary. It's scary.
I think there are 9 states across the country that actually have some voter registration restrictions now, or things that they're considering to be laws to prevent voter fraud, and there are actually 24 other states that are trying to look at legislation to pass that. I have some information that I got from the Brennan Center for Justice out of New York University Law School. And one of the things they talk about is that you actually have a better chance of being struck by lightning than seeing voter fraud happening. That's how little of it actually happens in this country. The federal fines for that are like $10,000 for one vote, plus 5 years in prison. It makes it a little bit hard to think that you want to go out because one vote isn't going to make normally that much difference in the election. In Florida, what's happening is you see in Florida where people are, the law is so restrictive in Florida that if an organization like the League of Women Voters, who most of us have a great deal of appreciation for, I certainly do, but they're known for going out and registering voters. They're on the up and up. They don't do anything on a partisan basis. Everything is extraordinarily nonpartisan. And they go out and they register voters, and basically they and the organization that a lot of the younger people are familiar with, Rock the Vote, have declined to do any voter registration in Florida anymore because of the restrictive nature of the legislation. They had an example of an organization went out and registered voters on Martin Luther King Day weekend, and when Monday came around and the state offices were closed, they could not submit the forms for registration. And somebody dropped them off Tuesday morning. And on Thursday of that week, the chairperson of that organization received a letter threatening them with jail because of the fact that they were 1 hour late submitting that voter registration form. And as a result of some of this stuff, in Florida alone, they're estimating 81,470 people less have been registered this year than were registered in 2008 in terms of the numbers that they expect to be able to be registered on a regular basis. So things are really happening, and these kinds of laws are intimidating people who are not even part of the class that they're aiming to restrict. So they're finding all over the place that these laws are very restrictive to minorities. Fully 11% of the population across the United States does not have proper transportation to get to places, to get the voter IDs that they need to register in these states. I mean, it's just been one thing after another, and these are predominantly poor people. They're seniors, they're minorities, they're people who have low education. These are the folks who are targeted, and these are definitely people who are normally Democratic voters. This is a real significant partisan issue being passed by Republican legislators throughout this country.
Maybe I just need to read, please put something in here. You may have heard in the news about a woman named Ruthelle Frank, who is 84 years old. She's been voting all her life since she was eligible to vote. She's kind of a poster girl for voting rights. She's insisting that she's going to vote in this election the way she has voted before. The state of Wisconsin was telling her that she needed an ID registration. She needs a copy of a certified copy of her birth certificate, which she doesn't have. It would cost, it would cost, for various reasons, it would cost a huge amount of money for her to obtain this thing. She plans to vote again, so she is fighting, and the ACLU and other groups are supporting her. An 84-year-old white woman who is among the poor, but she's not black, so it's not exclusively racially directed.
It's definitely
Oh, yeah, the certainly the main thrust of it goes to Latinos and African Americans. Yeah.
So now that we've talked about registering people, I think now we need to talk a little bit more about election day.
Thank you, Karen. My name is Rob Wilson, and I'm going to talk a little bit about in New Jersey voter rights and challenging at the polls. In the back of the room at the table when you walk in is a document, New Jersey Voters Bill of Rights, and it's front and back. It's a lot of information crammed into just a 2-page document, and it's very, I find it very interesting. I learned some things that I didn't know, and I've been challenging voters for 12 years, and I've been to recounts at the Board of Elections, and I've been involved in lawsuits over recounts and elections. Certainly when you talk about voter suppression and whether someone can properly vote or not, it has real consequences to the people involved and also to the towns involved. In Somerville 8 years ago, we had a mayor's race decided by 3 votes. In South Bound 4 years ago, we had a race that resulted in a tie. Just one vote, 2 votes in Somerville would have changed the outcomes of those elections. Bound 4 votes. And this year, this November, another presidential election day is going to be heavy voting, and there will be towns in Somerset County that probably come down to less than 10 votes. So, if you are challenging on that day, which is basically challenging at the polls for 2 reasons. One, to find out who from your party is voting so that you can engage and get out the vote efforts on election day. And 2, making sure that people who are casting votes are qualified to vote. It's going to be a very challenging, no pun intended, challenging. It's going to be very challenging in November 2012. I passed out a handout that has a couple of attachments. One is a notice to challengers' do's and don'ts, and the other is a poll watcher's guide that was put together specifically by the Somerset County Board of Elections. Very briefly on the challengers' do's and don'ts, a challenger can challenge a voter if the challenger believes the voter is not qualified to vote. In other words, not a United States citizen, 18 years or older, or a resident of Somerset County at least 30 days before the election who is registered to vote. Challenger cannot, and obviously should not, because if they do this, it's a crime, challenge a voter because they think they know how the voter is going to vote, challenge a voter because of race or ethnic origin, challenge a voter because of where within a town or county that voter lives. I just wanted to mention a couple of things in the documents and tell a couple of sort of, I guess, personal stories. It's noted in the county guide that allowed inside the polling places a person who is providing assistance to a voter. You'll see this sometimes. If someone can, if they are elderly, have a disability for whatever reason, ask someone, a friend or relative, to go into the voting booth with them. That's absolutely appropriate. Someone also may request assistance from the poll workers before going into a voting booth. And I've seen it done informally, just in last year's election. Someone gets in the voting booth and they look at the board and they say, "Help, what do I do?" Often, whichever poll worker is sort of in charge in that particular polling place will go in and provide assistance. What technically is supposed to happen is one from each party is supposed to go in, and I didn't realize this, but according to the Attorney General and the Voter Bill of Rights, they're actually supposed to if the voter's going to request assistance, they're supposed to fill out a disability certificate if they're going to do that. But I actually saw sort of a confrontation. If someone asked for help, someone went in and gave them help, and I think that another voter who I'm pretty sure felt that he was of a different party than the voter who was getting the help, began to confront the poll workers and say, you weren't supposed to do that. Well, it is legal. If someone needs help, they absolutely can receive that help. There is supposed to be one from each party going in to help them. Couple of things that I picked up that I just thought I'd mention. Does a poll watcher need to live within the election district in which the challenger or checker is serving? No, but that person must be a registered voter in the county in which he or she is serving. What does a challenger receive from the Board of Elections that's needed in the polling place? You need to have a certificate with the raised seal, and you're also supposed to wear a badge. They give you a badge. If anyone is interested in doing it this year, who's never done it before, that's what you're supposed to wear. And by the way, you can call Bob Baker if you're interested in doing that. We'll have his phone number if anyone wants to talk after the panel. Very briefly, activities a challenger or poll watcher can observe. Challenger can be present at the polling place when open and observe the opening of the machine and the examination of the counter to ascertain whether or not it registers zero. Can also observe voters casting their ballot. Can be present at the close of an election, observe the counting and tallying of the votes. Challenger tables are supposed to be arranged by the board workers in a location that does not interfere with the voters, but close enough to hear the board workers call the voter's name. This can be an issue. People may speak softly, poll workers may not want to repeat the names, and again, this year where there's going to be very heavy turnout, it's going to be difficult for challengers to keep up and to hear. If you're a challenger, you have a right to be close enough to hear. I saw a situation in Somerville a few years ago. We had to get the Board of Elections on the phone because the poll workers were refusing to let the challengers, frankly, be close enough to hear at one location. And we got the Board of Elections on the phone, put them on with the poll worker, and they said, move the table closer. These people have a legal right to hear this. But you're not allowed to sit at the same table as the board workers. You're not allowed to look over their shoulder as they're checking the books. You're not allowed to electioneer. You're not allowed to wear buttons, pins, t-shirts showing candidate or party support. You are allowed to observe the election, to keep a record of who votes, to challenge any voter for whom you have a reasonable basis to believe is not qualified to vote. If you're going to do that, if you're going to make a challenge is made to one of the board workers. That board worker is to report the challenge to the judge of elections. Do not confront the voter. Do not get in the voter's face and say, you're not allowed to be here. I know you're not 18, or I know that you live in another town. That's not legal. It's also not wise. It's a recipe for disaster. The last few items in the guide from Somerset County talk about what procedures are necessary when making a challenge, how a decision is made on a challenged voter, and as I said, I think I've done this 12 times, and I didn't know this, but if there's a challenged voter, the board workers, after reviewing the voter's document, vote on allowing the voter to vote. A majority vote in the affirmative or negative determines the voter's right to vote. A tie vote, 2-2, allows the voter to vote. I guess I'll just suggest if you happen to be challenging and you believe that someone is not a properly registered voter and you're actually registering a challenge, but if the vote were 2-2, I think that you could still request that they vote provisionally, which to me makes sense because then the vote isn't going to be counted until the Board of Elections has verified that they're properly voting. So if you do have a challenge, I think strongly suggest to the board workers that vote be a provisional vote. That way, if the person is properly registered, their right to vote has been secured. But if they're not, we don't want that vote being counted. It's tough to unring the bell. I'll note that the document also says, is there recourse if the voter is denied the right to vote? A voter who is denied the right to vote always has the right to appear before a judge of the Superior Court in Somerville. Those judges will be busy this year. Board workers should direct the voter to the Somerset County Board of Elections office with a copy of the challenger's affidavit and voter's affidavit. Board of Elections will make the arrangement to appear before the judge. If someone is denied their right to vote and you're challenging and you believe that they should be voting, but they're turned away, I would also suggest getting their information, getting their name, getting their address, getting their phone number. You never know, the whole race in that town could end up before a Superior Court judge sometime in the next few weeks after Election Day. So it doesn't hurt to have that person's information. There is, again, in the Somerset County document, in the poll watcher's guide, the last page contains a sort of a suggested polling place setup, and so you can see generally where the challengers will sit, and I guess I keep repeating myself. Most important thing, make sure you hear who's voting. It can be hard, and that's all I have.
In the last presidential election, you had in Somerset County improper directions given to the poll workers. They were told that if a person's name is not in the book, they were to call the office. Well, in a presidential election, that was patently, in any election that was improper. If the name is not in the book, they are to be given a provisional ballot. I happened to be a challenger at the time. I immediately got a copy of the directions that was given the poll workers. Obviously, if you have all of Somerset County and your name isn't in the book and you're trying to call one phone number, that's voter suppression's denying people the right to vote. The result was, I called the attorney, one of the attorneys, he came over, he said, that's unconstitutional. I said, yeah, what are you going to do about it? Okay, they went to court. The judge said that's improper. Then by 3 o'clock, new directions were given every poll worker saying, if the name isn't in the book, you give them a provisional ballot. But that's 8 hours after the polls opened. How many people came to vote, had to go to work, were discouraged, and never came back? Challengers have to be attuned to what the workers are doing. And that was systemic. Yeah. I'm not looking for an apology or a rationalization. I'm bringing this up to say that challengers have to know the rules themselves. And you have to defend the right of people to vote. I don't care whether they're Democrats or who they are. You don't know necessarily what their party affiliation is. But if you see a procedure that is patently wrong, you have either got to call an attorney or find out what's going on, because that was happening all through Somerset County. It didn't happen in Union County. It didn't happen in Mercer County, only in Somerset County. And I have to suggest to you, that happened in the presidential election, and we know during presidential elections you're going to have Democrats come out in large numbers. And I think we have to be very attuned to the possibility of something like that happening again. Now, in some of the states where you see the restrictions, in the southern states, the Attorney General has already stepped in because those states were monitored, and any changes in their voting requirements are subject to review by the federal government because they were part of the 1965 Voters' Rights Act. So those things will be taken care of. But in the Midwest, where you have Wisconsin and the northern states, these things have been passed. The cases are being brought. Depending on what judges are hearing it and their timetable, there may not be enough time by November to issue any kind of redress. And I suggest to you, in some of these places, you're going to see violence on Election Day. When you have soldiers in Wisconsin who had a military ID go to the poll and were not allowed to vote because they were told they didn't have a certain ID. There is going to be a lot of anger out there. And it's not a question of race. We're talking about college students who are going to be denied to vote because, for example, in certain states in the South, they were given the right, if you went to a state university, you could use the state college ID rather than the required one, but if you went to black colleges, that wasn't permitted. There are things going on, and in the southern red states, the federal government will take action and show cause and give orders. I am concerned about the Midwest. Now, Maine, the voters overturned it. In the League of Women Voters in Florida, I mean, it's absurd they gave up the host because the fines were so great. If you didn't have the registration forms in within a certain amount of hours, you would be fined gargantuan amounts. So this is voter suppression. It's already taking place. We don't know how many voters actually haven't registered because the outreach wasn't there. We don't know how many people on election day will go there not being aware of the new cards they have to have, people who have voted their whole lives. There's going to be confrontations at those polling sites because there are going to be people who are going to get angry and say, what do you mean I can't vote? People, some people really think voting is like, my guts. I voted all my life, don't tell me I can't vote. This is going to be a very tough election because of this nonsense.
One last thing. Sonia's right about the last presidential. I was also a challenger then.
Right.
And I had reported a number of problems that were occurring in the polls. I was in South Bound Brook, North Plainfield, Franklin Township, and there were a number of things going on that shouldn't have gone on. This year, we need not only challengers, we need poll workers. And I'm making a plea to the people who are here, if you know anybody who wants to be a poll worker, please let them know, and they need to contact the Election Commission in Somerville. If you want to be a poll worker, you need to take a class. And the class will be classes given in the northern part of the county, the central part of the county, and the southern part of the county. And there'll be you need to go to one. There'll be about 7. If you miss one in one part of the county, you can go to another. If you've gone to the class, you will get $200 for the day to be a poll worker. If you've gone to that one class, you're then eligible for $200 as a poll worker. Those who have gone to the class will be the first chosen to be poll workers. If you're a poll worker every year, you need to take that class every other year. So just taking it once is not enough. The election laws change yearly. So to be up to date, you really should take that class. If there still aren't enough poll workers, then those who haven't taken the class can be poll workers, and they'll be given some brief explanation. But it's important to have poll workers, particularly poll workers and challengers, who know what the law is and have taken that class. And they should be at every table in every district. Right now, there are enough poll workers who have taken the class within the last 2 years, according to the data we were given, to have 3 poll workers at each table. We should have 4. We also want to make sure that there are at least 2 Democrats at each table. There should be 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. But if there aren't enough people, they're going to put maybe 2 Democrats and 1 Republican, maybe 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat. They're also going to, they've enrolled students from Rutgers who are not registered Republicans or Democrats necessarily. They haven't taken the class, but they'll be brought in also and given a quick update on the law so that they can fill in to make sure that there are enough people at the table. So I'm just throwing that out. If you know anybody who wants to be a poll worker, please get them involved for the reasons that Sonia mentioned about the challengers, even more so for the poll workers. Also, they've added since the last time what they call master poll workers. And the master workers are people who really have a good background. Do you have a master?
Yeah, I'm a master worker.
Oh, okay, right, I think I saw you. And they really have a good background. As a challenger, Actually, I wanted to challenge one of the poll workers because going in the voting booth. And I had to, but when the challenger came, I spoke to the challenger who then went to the poll worker and straightened it out. I've seen poll workers go to the door when Spanish people come in and say, can I help you? Can I help you vote? And then go into the booth with them and tell them, now the best way to vote is you push this button here, this button here, this button here. And I did report her, by the way. I went to a poll worker and reported her. This year she's a candidate.
You have a question?
Yeah, I happen to be a poll worker.
Yes.
And last year we had 3 people there, which is impossible because you have to give them 1 hour to eat. So that means you only have 2 people on the thing there. And when you have like 400, 500, 600 work, in your district, and then you need one pulling the machine, the line backs up for a long time. And that's what they've been doing the last couple of years. They've been giving us only 3 instead of 4. And if the one goes to lunch, you gotta make sure it's a Republican or Democrat, so you have one at each time. And then the biggest problem in my district too is they should have some kind of age restriction for poll workers. We have these people who are in their 80s. I have one in my district. She comes with an oxygen tank. And she puts it on, and then in the middle of the day, I have to send her home because she ran out of oxygen. Well, they're just, I hate to say it, they happen to be too old to run the polls. And they're in their high 80s or whatever, and they take so long, and the line backs up. Now this next coming year too, a lot of districts in New Jersey, the schools are gonna be voting the same time in November while the election is going on. You're gonna have lines. The last 2 years ago for the school board, I had lines out the door, and we didn't get out of there till 9:30, because we don't have enough.
Yeah, one of the things, Hillsborough will have an election. In Somerset County, all but 2 districts have opted for November elections, which means you can vote for the school board candidates, but there's no budget on the.
Our school board election is Tuesday.
I'm working on Tuesday for the election.
Hillsborough and Montgomery are the 2.
Yeah.
Where you'll vote on budgets because they're not having the November election.
Yeah, that's an interesting twist on this.
But the other districts that are gonna have it, and if they only have 3 people, then you're gonna have lines backed up out the door.
Yeah,
that's why I'm asking for poll workers.
Yeah, I think that's a learning experience. Probably
They beg for them every year.
This is where the rubber hits the road. We can.
Yeah, I'll call you Pendra.
I just have one last thing I'd like to add, if I could.
Karen, anything for you?
Yes.
Could you hold this?
Sure.
When we talk about how important it is for people to vote and to remember to get out and vote, for years before I became a partisan individual, I did work with the League of Women Voters, and I did a lot of work around the state encouraging people to come out and vote. And one of the things I used to do at the end of my talk is just to kind of drive home the importance of everyone voting. I mean, we talked about 4 people in Bound Brook and a tie in South Bound Brook and 6 people in Somerville. When you look at the pool of eligible voters, this would be that pool of eligible voters. And of course, none of this is scientific. This would be the pool of people who are registered out of that group. This would be the number of people who actually vote. And if you're lucky, this is how many vote for the winner. So when you open that up and you take a look at that, and you have something that's this big, that's deciding your taxes, your police protection, your schools, all the things that happen in your communities, it's pretty significant to get people out to vote.
Well, I don't know why you don't push, like I do mail-in, I do absentee ballot. And if you have a lot of senior places, why don't they give them to mail in, right? I mean, they should.
It's part of the process that we started now. You're absolutely right. I went door to door.
That falls on the individual towns.
Well, I want to thank the panel. This is where the rubber hits the road, where all of our efforts either end in success or failure, where our futures are determined in English or Spanish. And we have now election origami, which is really fascinating, really, very, very compelling. So that wraps up our day's activities. I'm sorry, listen, anything you want to, what am I teasing?
Just one moment. I guess I brought some materials to give out that are kind of, this is a kind of condensation of the fight that we're facing, the war that we're facing. And this is because I hate to talk about these problems without saying that there is something you can do. I'd like each of you to take this. It's sort of a joke that you're going to need a magnifying glass to read some of the information on it, but you can see that there are ways that you can help. You can help to petition Attorney General Holder, who will be deciding some of these state cases and can intervene in some of them, and getting the word out by Facebook, Twitter, email, if you do such things. If you still talk, just open your mouth and talk to anyone you know to make them aware of how dangerous the voter suppression movement is.
There couldn't be anything more important than make sure everyone has the opportunity to vote, and that's all protected, especially this year. All right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I think we are well represented by on our Board of Elections. And Karen, thank you.